Greetings and welcome to Flanigan's Ecologic. I am your host, Ted Flanigan, and I'm delighted to have Claire Smith on the podcast. She's joining us from Geneva, Switzerland, where she lives and works. She's a vegan entrepreneur. We're going to be talking about food and its link to sustainability. She's also an impact investor. She's an advocate for plant-based and cruelty-free businesses. She's the CEO of Beyond Investing and the Chief Investment Officer for Beyond Impact. Claire, just really delighted to have you on the podcast.
I'm very happy to be here, Ted.
Tell us how you became a vegan entrepreneur. I want to talk all about veganism, but you clearly have two major aspects of your life. One being your food preference, and then the other being your finance background. But how did you? What brought the two of them together?
Well, yes, actually, you've really hit upon something, which is how I found that the two, if not completely at odds with each other, but I really wanted to try and bring them together in order to provide some kind of coherence and consistency in terms of not only how I live my personal life, but how I spent my professional life and also how I invested my money. So after, I don't know, something like 30 odd years in the financial industry, and over the last 10 years of that, becoming more interested in sustainable investing, I decided to sort of break free of my corporate job and start these businesses, which were primarily around investment, with one investment business being in listed equities, where we're an asset manager and we are running at the moment one ETF, although another ETF is coming up soon, which is called the US Vegan Climate ETF, VEGN. And on the venture capital side, we invest directly into startups and scale-ups that are replacing the use of animals. So you can see how the two sides of the coin, with the vegan ETF in the public markets and the venture capital side investing into new companies that have the potential to take market share from and replace existing supply chains and production systems, are very much two sides of the same coin. Yes, so it was a dilemma that I realized in the sort of mid 2010s that I really needed to do something and use that expertise in a way that made sense for me in terms of my own personal convictions and concern for the environment.
So exciting, so exciting. So now, what's an ETF?
Oh, an exchange traded fund. And they're a very, very popular form of investment, particularly in the US, but they have spread to Europe as well in recent years. And they're like a mutual fund. Obviously, the mutual fund market has been around for many, many years, but somebody had the bright idea of taking a mutual fund and making it tradable on the exchange. So instead of the sometimes quite wide bid-offer spreads that you find in mutual funds, and the fact that you can really only go into them on a daily basis or come out of them on a daily basis, these ETFs, because they're on the exchange, are traded all the way through the day. And so the price is moving just like a stock, and you can trade in and out of them. And some of the largest ETFs are the most popular traded instruments on the stock markets, far, as big as individual stocks. So we're not quite that big as yet, but right now we're around about 180 million in assets, which obviously we're very pleased about.
Congratulations. So let's talk. You mentioned you had 30 years in finance, your background. Let's talk about your vegan career, I guess, if you want to call it that. Am I right that you were a vegetarian for 20 odd years before becoming a vegan, or do I have this confused?
Yes, that's correct. Initially, when I first decided to stop eating meat and fish, it wasn't so evident to me the relevance of products such as eggs and cheese to harming animals. So I wanted to stop harming animals, and a very obvious way of avoiding harming animals is by not eating them, because the flesh of the fish or the meat,
Sure.
obviously the animal has to be killed in order to produce that. But over time, I was able to educate myself a little bit more, and so I turned vegan in the late 1990s. In fact, and I would say, without wanting to get too personal about it, that having my own daughter made me very conscious of the very strong bond between mother and child, and especially when it comes to feeding or nursing, as you say in the US. And as a result of that, I really started to feel even more empathy towards animals, and particularly mothers like cows, who are deprived of their calves in order that humans can drink milk. So that was something obviously I was very uncomfortable with, and that caused me to turn vegan at that time. Yes. Mm-hmm.
That's really interesting. So I think a lot of people will become vegan for health reasons or environmental reasons, ethical reasons. You discussed it was really the empathy that was really driving you in this direction.
Yes, and I think if more people kind of thought it through, I don't believe that anybody really gets up in the morning and thinks, "Oh, I'm going to go out and be nasty to an animal today." But it's so embedded in our society, and it's perceived as so normal to eat, drink, use these products, that it's far more unconventional to say no, I'm not going to, and it's actually more inconvenient as well, which was something I certainly found when I first became vegan, and it's become less of a problem as time has gone on, but it still is, even today, it still is a problem. And I will sometimes go places and find that there is literally nothing on the menu. Yeah.
Right.
Yes, that's really what gave rise to me being vegan, but I have absolutely no problem with other people deciding to go vegan, or at least cut down their consumption of animal products for all sorts of other reasons. And certainly the health aspect is extremely strong. I think everybody can do with eating more fruits and vegetables, and that's obviously been the direction of almost every single piece of health advice in the last 40 years. But the environmental side of things is itself extremely important. Our ETF, because it cuts out the animal products in the stock market, actually has a greenhouse gas exposure or emissions size of 65% less than the S&P 500. So part of that reduction is coming from avoiding fossil fuels, certainly, and some other high carbon industries. But a lot of that is coming from not investing in the animal production systems, which are themselves a very large emitter of greenhouse gases.
Mm-hmm. How interesting. I resonate when you talked about it being difficult, or somewhat difficult, and probably less so all the time, to be a vegan. I've been a vegetarian for a long time. And, you want to be able to go out to parties, and you want to be able to go to restaurants, and often there's nothing that you can eat, or you find yourself eating a lot of bread and carbohydrates and vegetables instead of, a main course. But I was doing a little bit of research. There's about 1 or 2% of the world's population that are vegans now, and I guess what veganism goes way back in the Indian culture, right?
Absolutely, yes, it's very strong out there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mainly within the Hindu community and the Jain community, some of whom are what they call strict vegetarians, so they avoid eating any animal product, and they even avoid, as far as I understand, they even avoid eating some root vegetables. Because they believe that in the disturbance of the soil that comes from digging up a root vegetable, you have the potential to harm insect life. So they will even avoid eating things like potatoes. Yep.
Oh, no kidding. I hadn't heard that. And then I've heard about bees that I was curious, do you eat honey? Some people
No, I
don't.
do avoid honey. Yeah.
You avoid honey.
I don't. Yeah. I don't eat honey. No. Mm-hmm.
And because it's an animal product.
Yes, because it is. And again, there's this sort of thread of empathy. I just feel sorry for the bees working so terribly hard to produce this food, which is supposed to kind of keep them going over the winter, and then we take it from them. And frankly, a lot of commercial beekeeping is giving them just sugar as a substitute, and that's not very nutritious for the bees as well. So I feel that we should just let the bees eat their honey.
Yeah. So what is, if you had to, what's a typical dinner for you? Are you eating a lot of tofu and seitan?
Yeah, I just
absolutely adore.
I just had quite a nice meal of tofu with vegetables and a sauce and rice. And something with a slightly Asian slant is fairly normal for me. I used to eat a certain amount of pasta as well. I'm very much more of a whole food vegan than a kind of junk food vegan, let's say. But that doesn't mean that I don't, enjoy. Well, I enjoy chocolate, dark chocolate. I can eat, but there are sometimes some vegan milk chocolates available, some vegan ice creams from time to time. There's very good vegan cheeses now, and we've invested in one of the in the main French artisanal and organic producer of vegan cheese, and I think that they produce some extremely good products.
And are those nut based then, or what's at the core?
Yes, they tend to be based on cashew, soy, sometimes on almonds as well. So yes, there's a certain amount of soaking the nuts and then sort of mixing it into a paste, and then they ferment the paste. So I think what's important about that investment and other investments that we've done that are similar is that we are not investing in the sort of enormous long ingredient lists of, with lots of additives, emulsifiers, things that are sort of holding the thing together, but in what is real food. So this vegan cheesemaker, the ingredient list is 4 ingredients. So the ferment, the 2 different types, cashews, soy, some salt, and then the fermentation agent, which just, the yeast that just kind of gets the process going. So yes, so not a sort of synthetic type of product.
I'm a big fan of Michael Pollan. Are you familiar with Michael Pollan, who wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma? And he's a University of California, Berkeley journalist who became a great expert by writing, researching, and writing The Omnivore's Dilemma, and sort of starts off with going into a supermarket. What do you there's 11,000 products, what to eat. And one of his rules, I guess it was in a later book, was don't buy anything that has an ingredient that your grandmother would not recognize. Just stay away from all the chemical additives and, like you said, emulsifiers and this and that, and just stick with the real basics. But more and more, there's just more and more on the menu, isn't there? And there's more and more available in the markets. And then we, of course, we're eating organically almost 100% now, which was very difficult to do a couple decades ago.
Yes, I'm very pleased to see the growth of organic products. The issue of eutrophication, so excess nutrients going into the waterways and then feeding into the oceans. This is a big issue, where we've actually exceeded planetary boundaries, according to the Stockholm Resilience Center. And partly that's coming from fertilizers, and it's coming from animal runoff as well. So if you are organic and vegan, then you're avoiding both of those causes.
Yeah. So many questions for you, Claire. I want to talk about a little bit more about the veganism, and then I really want to get into the funds and how you've been able to meld these two, and you really come up with win-win solutions. Now, what about leather? I presume is leather out in other animal products? I don't know. Maybe you could talk about
Yes,
what other animal products are out there that some of us should be
yes,
avoiding if
it's
we want to be really conscious about this.
absolutely. It's all part of the same supply chain. And so certainly in terms of the investment programs, we're investing across nutrition, ingredients. This is in the venture side, nutrition, ingredients, pharmaceuticals, and materials, as the four broad categories where animals are used. Because you need to replace all of the products. If an animal is being created and there are uses being found for all parts of its body, then we need to find different ways to produce all of those different things. And whereas obviously everybody thinks of the food side of things as being the majority of what an animal might be used for, certainly leather is a strong component, a critical component. I dislike when people tell me that it's a byproduct, because my understanding is it can be as much as 10% of the value of a carcass. And as such, given that the animal industry is operating on pretty fine margins, it can make the difference between whether it's profitable to rear an animal or it's not. So it is important. And it's really rather a terrible industry. I mean, skin would naturally decompose. So to take an animal's skin and stop it from decomposing, there's an enormous amount of harsh chemicals which are used, both in the tanning and then in the dyeing of the product. And that again goes into our environment and is extremely harmful to the workers in those industries as well.
So what are the alternatives for leather? I mean, I think of course we don't need handbags and things like that, but shoes, most shoes are made of leather. What are the options for that?
Yes, it's interesting you should ask that. Some time ago, I did invest in a shoe company which was using these alternative leathers. And ironically, what has happened is that although they still retain part of a factory and are active in the fashion business to some extent, their focus has shifted almost entirely to the creation of their own alternative leather, because the leathers that were available to them to make shoes from were not very suitable. They were not durable enough. They were often plastic, which obviously has its own problems. So they fell apart. The quality and the availability of products to replace leather or to be used in the same applications as leather are very few and far between. So this company has actually developed its own leather, and what's actually even better about it is it's plastic free for a start, but it's also using food waste. It's using what's left over after fruit is pressed, fruit skins, also vegetables, and they've developed various different recipes to obtain different types of leather of different thicknesses, durability. They can waterproof this leather, and so it's not only replacing the animal and also replacing the plastic versions of leather, things like polyurethane, etc. But it's also using food waste that would otherwise decompose and itself give off methane. So, we've got kind of layers and layers of benefits, of sustainability benefits from this particular product. And you mentioned shoes, but there's also been quite a bit of interest in these products from amongst the car companies, who are very keen to reduce their carbon footprints and actually find that the leather on the seats in their cars is quite a large part of the carbon footprint of a car. Really? So they really want to shift to these alternatives.
That's fascinating. And talk about pharmaceuticals for a second. I hadn't thought about that at all. But are some pharmaceuticals are derived from animals?
Yes, quite a number. I mean, animals are used in many places in the process of developing a pharmaceutical, as I'm sure you know, in terms of study of disease, in terms of drug testing in the preclinical trials. And one of our investments actually is in a replacement for what's called animal models, in terms of cells which are used as a replacement for humans, or in terms of testing of drugs, or in terms of toxicity tests. So used in place of the animals before it gets to the humans. Sorry, and these cells are actually breathing like a lung, or digesting like a stomach cell, or liver cells, etc. So it's really very clever technology, and they've actually found that these cell replicas, which they call organ chips, are able to provide far more accurate tests than an animal. And not unreasonably so, because these are human cells, so you would expect them to behave more like a human than if you give something to, for example, a rat. So we're investing in that area too. And then in terms of actual drugs, pharmaceuticals themselves, the biggest and best example of this is insulin. Insulin was formerly an animal product. Now almost all of the insulin which is on the market is made through a process called precision fermentation, where microbes are expressing the insulin. So microbes are being used to generate the insulin. Before, insulin obviously is a natural product that humans produce in their own bodies, and that's how they deal with sugar in their blood and process it. Now, before insulin could be created using synthetic biology, it was being obtained from pigs' pancreases. And so that shift has been absolutely crucial, because if you imagine how many people are diabetic these days, how many pigs and their pancreases would be needed in order to supply the amount of insulin which is needed on the market. So that's one very powerful example, because everybody, if they're not diabetic themselves, everybody knows somebody else who is diabetic, needs insulin as a drug. And this is being produced without any use of animals now, whereas in the past you would have had to use this animal-derived insulin, which was not always very safe. It was not always very pure. It had contamination, etc. So this is a much purer and superior version, obviously, than the animal product.
I hate to
that's something we're driving towards in other fields as well.
Very interesting, and I hate to bring everything back to dollars and cents. Are these alternatives now being developed at a point where they're not bearing a cost premium? In other words, is it more expensive to make insulin this way than the way they used to do it?
Oh no, the way insulin is being made now is not more expensive than it was in the animal world, as it were, and especially since it has been scaled up to such a large degree. I know that, you know, in some markets insulin is still is a very expensive drug, but I think that's more about the pricing decisions of the pharmaceutical industry than anything else. We clearly need these alternative products to be cost competitive.
Yeah.
And this is why pharmaceuticals in this area is quite an important area for our companies and our portfolio to explore in terms of the products that they bring to market, because they can sometimes achieve higher price points within a pharmaceutical, or sometimes often it's not within a drug context, but more within something like the cosmetics market, because those products on a sort of price per kilo basis are far more than a food product. People have got used to food being very cheap, and the only way that you can produce food cheaply is by producing it at enormous scale. for a startup to go from zero to enormous scale is extraordinarily difficult. So a go-to-market in the pharmaceutical or cosmeceutical, nutraceutical area, so where there are these perceived health benefits over and above something being a food product, is a very good way for these startups to get some first production, which is often going to be at smaller volumes, at a higher price in order that they have some revenue, which they can then build upon. It enables them possibly to get more funding from VCs once they've proven that they can sell their products, and then over time be able to scale up and enter the food market as their size, the size of their production, is large enough that they achieve those economies of scale.
Fascinating. Now, you've been able to create these funds, and I understand they're doing quite well. I mean, just looking at your website, it looks like you're providing very strong returns to your investors, right?
Yes, we've actually been very gratified by the performance this year. I would say that our ETF is designed to allow vegans and environmentalists and people that are concerned about responsible investing as well from a social aspect, because we are removing tobacco, weapons, those kind of things as well. Allowing them to be able to put their money into the stock market and kind of sleep at night, not be worried about what their money is profiting from.
Yeah.
And as a result of that, we do end up we have a very broadly diversified portfolio, but it is a little more oriented towards tech, for example. And as a function of that, whereas obviously it's got very little in oil, and in fact nothing in oil, so very little in energy. We do have some renewable energy positions in the portfolio, and they've been doing well. We obviously are rather underweight consumer staples, because the consumer staples market is primarily food, and within the food sector, most of the stocks that are in the market that are publicly listed stocks are food stocks that are using animals, so we are not holding those either. So we do have a little bit of a growth bias, and we are not so heavily into these defensive industries like energy and consumer staples. This means that our ETF has a slightly higher beta, so it moves a little bit more on the upside and a little bit more on the downside than the market, although I will say that our volatility is still within reasonable bounds. And then in some very defensive markets, so 2022 was one of our weaker years. Obviously, the oil price performed extraordinarily strongly during that year as well, because of what was going on in Ukraine. And when that has occurred, our fund has tended to underperform during those years. But on aggregate, over the now almost 7 years where we've been running the fund, we've had more good years than bad years, and we are now quite handily ahead of the market based on the latest performance numbers, which I saw this morning, which come through from September 2019, which was when we started, through to the end of May. And we are on an annualized basis, I think almost 3% ahead of the S&P 500, which is very good.
That's got to be incredibly gratifying that you've been able to take this ethical basis for your career and meld it with your finance and provide strong returns for your investors.
It is an ethical basis. It is a sustainable basis, but we do also, myself and my business partners, the other two directors that joined with me in 2016 and put together the company that is the sponsor of the ETF. We do believe that the issue of sustainability is going to sort of come back and bite companies that are unsustainable. They are subject to lawsuits more often. They have to spend a hell of a lot more money on lobbying in order to still, have that sort of freedom to operate, to to be able to pollute, as it were. And they are essentially broken business models. In the long term, the energy companies, the oil companies cannot afford to we can't afford to burn all the oil they've already discovered to date. That oil does have to be kept in the ground. So if the oil has to be kept into the ground, what is the true value of their reserves? A lot of their share price at the moment is based on that value, but they're not going to be able to actually sell all of it.
Yeah.
It would be quite catastrophic. I can see similar kinds of parallels with animal agriculture as well. That if the size of herds reduces, the economies of scale that they've obviously benefited from the industrialization of animal agriculture over the last 50 years or so, and the huge increase in the consumption of meat that has occurred as a result of that, they will start to unwind, and there could well be stranded assets in that industry as well. In fact, there already are. Plenty of dairy farms and dairy processing plants which are no longer being used.
Claire, thank you so much for educating me and our listeners. I have about 20 more questions. We're going to have to do another episode again, but congratulations on what you've been able to put together. Thank you for what you put together. And again, thanks for being on the podcast. Really appreciate your time and your insights.
Thank you very much for having me, Ted.
That's it. Thanks for listening to Flanigan's EcoLogic. We'll see you next time.